First of all, I apologize. English is not my native language and this is my first time trying to translate one of my stories into English. Prologue. It is the 10th of October at night, and currently in the village of Konoha things are relatively calm, although not for the reasons one might think. You see, about 10 years ago if you had arrived at the village of Konoha you would be watching the formerly famous Fox Festival that culminated with a wonderful fireworks display, unofficially, closing with the fox hunt that had been suspended for at least 3 years, due to circumstances that many preferred to simply forget. Today, it was a black date on the calendar of the Leaf Village that reminded them of the greatest blunder in recognized history, because in addition to signifying the defeat of the Kyuubi, it was also the birthday of the true and unrecognized hero of the village. Since that day it has already been 10 years as mentioned in the past, 10 years that had been more than bitter, full of sorrow for the person who looked at the village from the Hokage monument, just as a certain dyed black-haired genin loved, who used to do this to clear his mind when even he looked completely overwhelmed. 10 years in which more than ever he found himself regretting the decision he had made regarding the poor boy. The turning point for the village was that day when Sasuke Uchiha, his now recognized half-brother and who was apparently expelled from the Uchiha clan a year before the massacre, made the incredibly stupid decision to flee to Otogakure to be trained by Orochimaru. And with the power that the idiot brat thought he would get from the most deceitful Sannin of all, he could finally kill his older brother Itachi Uchiha. Naruto Uchiha, the now confirmed true heir of said clan even if he was only because both Fugaku and Mikoto had adopted the child as their own due to miraculous circumstances, had been chosen to be part of the recovery group, where from what he had learned from Sasuke himself, although reluctantly his half-brother had finally revealed his true strength, achieving his goal of bringing him back, although he never explained how that battle had been. By the time Kakashi and a couple of doctors found the half-brothers, Naruto was barely able to walk, carrying his stepbrother on his back despite the large fist-sized holes visible on his chest and the fact that he had clearly been bleeding for a while. Compared to his younger brother Sasuke, he actually had much smaller wounds, being a slight shock that had managed to knock out the brat. A small minor wound again compared to his younger brother. Did this matter to Kakashi and the doctors? Of course not, they had practically snatched his brother out of his hands and carried him back to the village at full speed, leaving Naruto alone on his own, forcing him to go at a slower and slower pace due to the severity of his injuries. He definitely knew that things were not going to change. He was aware that people even in spite of what he had achieved would refuse to recognize him for who he was and not for what they believed of him. A tragic thought considering that while Sasuke had actively tried to kill him with everything he possessed in his arsenal, including 2 Chidori's hit directly in his chest, Naruto had fought only to subdue his older brother and bring him back to the village following the promise he made to his mother that no matter if his father had banished him from the clan he would protect his disgraced brother, even if he hated his brother he could never renege on the promise he had made to his mother. At the end of the day he had been absolutely right. The village never did not look favorably on what he did. XXXXX Konoha Council cameras. 2 days after the recovery mission Ninja Genin number 012607. Uzumaki Naruto. Tsunade's voice was muffled, almost as if she didn't trust that she wouldn't break down if she spoke a little louder. It is my duty to inform you that a vote has been held and that a majority decision of 17 to 8 has been taken in the council. The decision reached was to strip him of his rank and banish him from Konoha. This order must be carried out immediately. The reason is that you inflicted heavy damage on Uchiha Sasuke even though your mission was to retrieve him. Another reason why Tsunade didn't say this out loud was that everyone had felt that Naruto was using a dark chakra. Many thought that he was using the Kyuubi chakra but she knew better. Naruto himself had told her in confidence that only a younger brother could have an older sister, that the Kyuubi was not sealed in his being. He had even shown her the place where according to everyone was the seal that should contain the beast. She had been surprised of course however with Jiraiya refusing to speak, and Naruto being ignorant of what happened to the beast in question could do little and nothing. Again for them it was Naruto Uchiha until Sasuke finally spoke that he had actually been adopted by his family and that didn't happen until relatively a few years ago. Now returning to the current situation, the black-haired young man had been summoned to the council while he still had many injuries caused by his battle. The council had not even allowed the boy to recover from his injuries to banish him. However, He did not appear dejected while listening to the council's statement, rather he showed resignation almost as if he had expected it, and a bit of disappointment as if he had believed that this would happen much sooner. All of the civilians and the shinobi advisors actually showed him a smug expression on their faces, enjoying the fact that the one they called Demon Brad would eventually leave their village, and with him his curse would be gone. Danzo had actually used his 2 votes to make sure it was so, and Naruto was actually upset that Uchiha's vote was being used against him. He didn't understand why. After all, he knew Danzo would use the vote until Sasuke was a jounin or came of age. Of course she was aware that the man had his plans to recruit the supposed Jinchuriki by force in Raiz once he left the village. It's not like for some reason if she was going to allow that. Hell, from some rumors she had heard, it was the traitorous Uchiha who saved Naruto on a couple of truly dangerous occasions. Unfortunately, Tsunade would not be able to ask the man, since she had no true way of contacting a traitorous shinobi, even if she herself had her doubts about the man's guilt. The last clans to vote for Naruto's banishment were the Kurama and Inuzuka clans, who thought that Naruto was the Kyuubi himself in human form, the former due to popular opinion, and the latter out of sheer anger. The rest of the clan chiefs looked at said clan chiefs with disdain. Naruto, however, didn't even give them a look. Not that she could do it, for some reason she always covered her eyes and even she hadn't seen what she was hiding, and if she was honest she was genuinely curious to know how she was able to move around blindfolded. At least until he slowly removed the headband from his face to let it fall to the ground, revealing a beautiful pair of bright blue orbs. Tsunade had no doubt that this was a unique style of Daojutsu, given that she had never heard of eyes like that before in her life. She soon saw that he was trying to take off the necklace she had given him. However, before he did so she stopped him. "Keep it, you earned it fairly and I hope it helps protect you." Tsunade barely managed to say that with her trembling voice and tears that were already escaping her eyes. Naruto, for the first and only time in his life, had actually given a real smile to someone, and after giving him a small nod, the boy turned around and left the council room to return home to put away his few valuable possessions, and to surely get something that would cover those beautiful and bright eyes. Unbeknownst to him, before the rabbit dissolved by the meeting, there was another vote. With another overwhelming majority of votes, it had been decided that the Sandaime laws on Naruto and his supposed status as a container of the Kyuubi would be instantly revoked. This would allow the younger generations to know the truth, and as it could not be otherwise, the news spread quickly among the whole world, and the reactions to this news were really mixed. As this was going on, Naruto continued his walk to his apartment to pack, and at some point along his way, to his misfortune, he came across the rest of Konoha's 12, excluding Sasuke of course. That idiot. He deserves to die for beating Sasuke-kun like that. Sakura's scream hadn't surprised him at all, I agree. We should go find that demon and kill him. That cry of Ino and that he agreed with Sakura hadn't surprised him either. He actually found it terribly funny. After all, it was well known that even if he couldn't use chakra, at least not the conventional one, was after Sasuke the strongest of his generation, and Sasuke could easily beat all of them together, while he was the only one who gave his brother a decent fight. Not that they knew that things were actually the other way around, and Sasuke was the only one who made him at least take their fights a little seriously. He was the fox all this time. He should have known. I could smell a putrid smell from him all the time. He should be dead. Kiba had actually hurt a little. They weren't friends, but they weren't enemies either. How unmouthful. Naruto fooled us all the time and was the Kyuubi from the start. Lee's exclamation had actually hurt him, much more than any other comment he had ever heard in his life. He saw him as a true friend and rival, both overcoming the adversity of their conditions, even if Lee's was more real than his. And hearing what he thought had really hurt him, he hadn't cried since that night, but that one had almost made him cry. At least that was until a new voice called his attention. "Shut your mouth, Lee." Neji had shouted that so coldly that not even he was surprised by the amount of poison in the normally stoic Hyuga's voice. "He's like me, not his situation is much worse than mine. He has a seal like mine, but 1,000 times worse. Even with the seal of fate on my forehead, I'm seen as an important person, being a ninja recognized as a prodigy. Naruto has the seal that keeps the beast at bay, and yet, many people in the village despise him for something beyond his control, and yet he always gets back up after every blow, fighting against his world-imposed fate. and even showed me if he had to force me to see that fate is not something we should be chained to but something we forge with every action we take. He wasn't sure if he had taught Niji that, but his words actually brought out his second honest smile in many years. I can even tell you something, I'm a little familiar with seals, you're just idiots. You're not even able to tell the difference between a scroll and the weapon it contains. That Tenzin defended him was actually a bit surprising given that they had only spoken on a couple of occasions. Hinata was crying. Naruto knew because of course, she was in love with him. He wasn't in love with her. He was sad but things like that were thankful that his feelings weren't a monster after all. But he couldn't love her because he just wasn't meant to be. If I got bored of Hinata's bullying, it was funny at first. But there comes a point where 20 adults kicking a baby becomes tiring, problematic. Shikamaru muttered. He knew that Naruto didn't even have the damn seal to begin with. That sign was especially noticeable given the ease with which Naruto lost his shirts in battle. And of course he knew that by logic he was not the Kyuubi. However, he didn't know what words to formulate because he was too angry with this injustice. Chaoji was simply behind Shikamaru eating a fourth bag of chips. However, if you were a good observer you would see that the boy was sad and upset about the way he was eating, and Naruto was a good observer. Thank you, friends. It was all Naruto could say in a faint murmur before continuing on his way to his apartment. He had to pack up what little he had after all. Shino, he was left out in this whole event. By the way, the news had spread quickly among all the villagers. They learned that he had been banished, and as a result most of the citizens were celebrating. The kunoichi and shinobi of all kinds were going crazy and celebrating the fact that they would finally get rid of the demon. Very few citizens and shinobi actually took the news that a shinobi was being banished for doing their job, while over the city people were celebrating. Naruto, however, was gathering what little value he had in a small backpack, preparing to leave, when out of nowhere Kakashi and Jiraiya, his so-called teachers whom he could never really trust, simply appeared to tell him that they were disappointed in how he had acted, going so far as to even revoke his toad summoning contract. Not that it particularly hurt him, he could never summon the damn overgrown frogs. Once all was said and done, he simply lay down on his sleeping bag and closed his eyes, waiting expressionlessly for tomorrow. When he finally fell asleep he simply appeared in a mental landscape where he appeared whenever his mind felt alive. Although he did not have the slightest contact with the Kyuubi, that did not mean that there was not someone inhabiting him in a certain way. He did not know how it had happened, but the woman whom he had loved the most with all his heart had somehow prevented his soul from crossing into the afterlife, and now he could talk to her in his dreams. He assumed that the love between a mother and a child was so powerful that it simply transcended even death itself. Mikoto Uchiha, the woman who raised him as her own son, who showed him what true love of a mother was and supported his every action even if he disapproved of some of them. Although Fugaku loved him as a father can love a son, he was not left behind, or maybe he did, and that is why Itachi continued to protect him in the shadows. To tell the truth, he didn't know, but if so, he could only wait to see his brother, even if it was one last time, so he could say goodbye properly. Returning to the subject of his mother. She taught him everything she knew while she was alive and continued her teaching from her dreams. However, due to her circumstances she asked him never to show his abilities, unless he had no other choice. And so he did, even during the fight against his half-brother, fight that had torn his mother apart because of how far her son had gone from the middle. He never showed anything beyond a limited arsenal of taijutsu and no jutsu. Not that he could use them, his energy for some reason he didn't understand was nothing like the conventional chakra needed to use jutsu. Although he could make a rudimentary Rasengan. Not that I used it much, my child is very much so. The black-haired woman said, if things hadn't been the way they were, I'm sure you would have had a better life. I doubt it. Even if Dad's coup was successful, you can't govern the people with fear because sooner or later they will fight. Naruto told him as he plopped down next to him. At least we're together, not for long. Sooner or later even the bond that unites us will not be enough to bind my soul to this world, the woman said sadly, and if I hadn't been so selfish, none of this would have happened. Naruto knew what he meant. He had confessed that he had used Naruto's own energy to regenerate the wounds caused by his eyes during the fight, that being his only advantage during the fight. Sasuke on the other hand had launched himself against him with that frankly grotesque transformation that tripled his powers, actually putting them on a quite similar level. He simply had an advantage in stamina and almost instantaneous healing factor, which allowed him to make the battle become one of attrition. Fortunately for Naruto, he was much more stubborn than his brother, even since they were children, and he was not going to break the promise he made to his mother. Even if to fulfill it he would have to leave the same hell to take care of his idiot brother, and thanks to that stubbornness he managed to create an ideal situation for him in battle. Even if it almost cost him his life from hemostatic shock, honestly it would have been a relatively quiet death compared to his many other near deaths. Sasuke would never admit it, but Naruto was always stronger, and even with his greater skill in the field of the jutsu variety, and his clear intention to kill his younger brother, if he had delivered more blows, Naruto simply had on his side a much superior physical capacity, much more speed, his more than unique variant of the Rasengan, and the forced regeneration that his mother used to keep him alive. After all, for a mother the life of her son would always come first. That is why she had used her own energy to heal him, even if it cost her banishment. At least I managed to hurt his false pride. Naruto said in a vain attempt to console himself. I don't even know what your brother became anymore. The woman said as she let out a deep sigh. Still, there's something we need to talk about, she said, earning her son's full attention. It's about what to do now. You know as well as I do that the bastard Danzo and many others won't rest until they have you in their clutches, and with Itachi slowly dying from his blood curse. There's only one place where you could be safe, and that in itself is very risky. Where is that? The boy asked, choosing not to be affected by the fact that his older brother didn't have much more time. Beyond the wall, the woman said solemnly, causing Naruto to actually tense up quite a bit. However, before I tell you my plan, I must tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago, something that would have destroyed you and that I didn't want to tell you out of shame, but given the situation, hiding it is no longer useful. XXXXX. A few others later, October 10th finally arrived. It was a sunny day in Konoha. Nothing particular was happening on that day, but there was something different about the atmosphere. Today the biggest celebration of the year was taking place. The streets were full of very happy people. If someone came to Konoha for the first time today, they would think that the village was probably one of the happiest places in the whole land. Curiously, just like a certain island. If I'm watching One Piece and oh my god how slow is Dressrosa. In fact, right now 6 mysterious figures were entering Konoha for the first time in many, really many years. Or tried after all, since a certain ray of sunshine left the village. The 2 gate guards certainly started to do their job better. Hi. Indicate your name, rank, and reason for coming to Konoha. One of the guards said as he looked up to see who the figures were, only to faint due to shock. The other guard, noticing that his faithful friend fainted, simply approached him to see if he was okay. Hey Izumo. What happened? Kotetsu asked as he moved to try to revive him. What did you do to him? The Shinin shouted at them while trying to see the figures. However, when he succeeded he simply followed his eternal companion and fainted. I guess we should have expected that. I comment on one of the figures. That's what you get for being so famous in this town. Hey, you were very famous too. A third voice argued, this time a much younger one, still not as famous as Mama. He defended a voice, this time a much more childish one. Okay, well you win. We should keep the hoods on until we get to the Hokage's office. We don't want to start a commotion now, said one of the figures, choosing to change the subject due to the loss of the previous plot. The other figures just nodded according to him, so they put on their hoods and started walking towards the village. During the way they could not help but smile. The town was undoubtedly very lively. Children, adults, mothers and fathers were all happy. The whole Uondo was having a great time talking and relaxing, telling jokes and laughing at them. They even seemed to be having a big celebration throughout the village. Today is our birthday, right? One of the figures asked with a small smile. Yes, of course they do, and it seems that the people are celebrating it in a big way. The tallest of the figures replied with an even bigger smile. Ooh, I can't wait to see our baby. One of the female figures said, noticeably excited at the idea. I can't wait any longer, we should hurry to the office, said the older man, who sounded a little excited at the prospect of seeing someone he had left behind long ago. He officiates the Hokage some time later. I can't believe those bastards are already with that shitty celebration. Damn shitty village. Tsunade growled, completely furious, and at the same time with great helplessness. From the very moment the villagers learned about Naruto's banishment, they chose to celebrate on his birthday, the biggest festival of all, to celebrate the demon's expulsion. When she had heard that, of course she had become completely furious and had demanded that everyone return to their homes and go about their daily lives. In fact, there were few people who chose not to participate in this, most being people who knew that Naruto, even if he was quite distant with everyone, he would never do any harm to people even if he was hurt. These Anko Mitarashi did not know that he knew Naruto, considering that neither of them had had contact in their time in the village. Ibuki Marino was more understandable. The man was Konoha's head of intelligence, so evidently he had information that Naruto was not even the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Even if he never revealed it to anyone she knew, he probably did it to Anko, who was his protege, which would explain why she refused to participate in the celebrations. Genma and Meishiro knew. I didn't know very much how or why they didn't participate and refused to say, but neither of them participated in this, the secondary branch of the Hyuga clan, as well as Hayashi and his two daughters. Surely because thanks to their eyes they knew that it was not the Jinchuriki, even if the main branch, and for some reason Niji thought otherwise due to the damn rumor mill of Konoha, Hana and Izuka, who because of this found herself in constant friction with her clan, as well as Yugo Yuzuki, along with the entirety of the Aburame and Akimichi clans, and a small part of the Nara clan and the Yamanaka clan. In fact, as far as she knew, Giant Sarutobi was having many conflicts with his brother and had had them with his father for allowing the aberrant treatment that Naruto had in this village since he was born. His greatest benefactors died. He refused to say who those benefactors were, but from what he had told him, they were powerful. There were people who were furious with the festival, such as Konohamaru and his friends. From what the boy had told him when he asked him, even if Naruto was distant, he was always willing to play with them, give him advice, and indeed his philosophy of life came from Naruto, and Tsunade couldn't help but be amazed by the young man's wisdom. People will see what they want to see of you, some may see beyond, but do not count on them to be many, so live your life according to your law and treasure the few who see the real you. There were others, of course. Shino, Hinata, Niji, Tenten, Shoji and Shikamaru had chosen to stay out of it all and not participate in the blissful festival, the latter two even having a rather nasty fight with their sensei and teammate from what she had heard. Lastly, there was the Ichiraku family was completely devastated by the loss of Naruto in their lives. Even if the boy never paid his bill, he was always a welcome customer in their store, because although he rarely spoke, the few times he did, he completely brightened their day. And next to them was the entirety of Konoha's red light district. Ironically, the outcasts of society always saw Naruto for what he was, just another person. He was funny in a sense, the poorest area, who had the worst education of all, and yet were the only ones who could see beyond what everyone said was the truth. Naruto, I hope you're safe, the woman muttered to herself with deep sadness in her voice. Just as he finished his thoughts, someone knocked on his door. Wait. I won't see anyone today, she screamed with her fury showing in her voice. This would be enough for most people to leave the place running. Even most of the low-level jounin would run away, but still people kept banging on the door, something that made the blonde annoyed as she was about to get up to rip off the arms of the idiot who seemed not to understand words. That you are one-armed. Just kick to open the door, someone shouted from the other side of the door. And just seconds later the door opened to show its unwanted visitors. And when the blonde saw who it was, she couldn't help but start to pale noticeably, to the point that she ended up fainting from the shock, although she recovered remarkably quickly from the shock just a few minutes later. What the hell just happened? He groaned as he rubbed his head. Well, you saw us and then you passed out. One of the figures said that he had entered the room, causing Tsunade to look towards them to see who it was, and when he did, his eyes opened once more. Minato, Kushina? Are they really you? He asked, hoping with all his might that these people were not who he thought they were. Didn't Jiraiya-sensei tell you that we were alive? I thought that when you became Hokage I would tell you. The yondaime asked, noticeably confused. The blonde just stood there, completely motionless without fully understanding what was happening, at least until all the pieces fell into place in her head, and when that happened blind fury quickly flooded her. So, where's my baby? Kushina asked with an excited voice, excited to meet her son. Minato had the same expression. Tsunade for her part looked furious, something that completely confused both Minato and Kushina. Tsunade Bakon, where is my brother? A relatively young voice said. When Tsunade returned to the direction of the voice for a few seconds, his face was softened. He was an almost identical copy of Naruto, almost because he had noticeably longer hair and red hair. Bam. However, the tenderness lasted very little time, and in a moment the simple blonde punched the impertinent redhead in the face, sending him flying and crashing into the world, which collapsed on him. "You have no right to call me that," she roared utterly furiously, with tears streaming down her eyes. "What the hell is wrong with you, sensei?" Kushina asked, annoyed by the treatment of her eldest son. "And you lost the right to call me sensei." Tsunade yelled at the older redhead, releasing her killer instinct, which caused the other little Namekians to tremble in fear. "Why do you react like this, Tsunade?" Minato demanded, who was also a little intimidated by the woman. The goddess simply told them each and every one of the reasons she had to be furious with them, without omitting the smallest detail she knew, and of course she left them completely horrified to hear how Naruto's life had been, although of course none of them wanted to believe a single word of what they had heard. They just didn't want to believe it. All their lives they thought Naruto was a hero, and instead they were hearing that their son had been beaten to near death on multiple occasions. But they had heard very different things in their travels. They had been to countries like the wave, the spring, the moon, or the birds, where Naruto was worshipped almost as a hero. So it made sense to them that their village loved him on the same level, but much more so as it was their home village. Or at least that was the way of thinking of the Namekians and their children. So why are they celebrating? Why are they celebrating my son's birthday? Kushina shouted. She was furious, not angry at the people for everything they did to her son. That's because they are celebrating that 3 months ago Naruto was banished from the village. Tsunade told them in just a growl. What? Both Minato and Kushina and their children screamed so loudly that their cry was heard throughout the village and some of its surroundings. Kushina simply slumped into the chair behind her. She was completely dejected, and just when things were tense, out of nowhere she let go of her chains and caught someone who was standing at the window. "You're going to explain this to us?" The sound was barely a growl, but the pale Sannin could see that he was fucked up. XXXXX back to the present. Minato had to sigh once again, regretting his naivety and innocence of the past. In the end it turned out that leaving Naruto in the village was a very serious mistake. Possibly the most serious of his entire life. Sarutobi had not fulfilled his request to take care of his son. On the contrary, he had made him the scapegoat of the village. Listening to Jiraiya was the worst of mistakes. Naruto had a strange chakra was true. That's why he couldn't become the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi even if his body was the strongest of his eldest sons. Instead he divided the beast into 2 halves between his twin brothers, and according to his sensei's advice it was better for his 2 sons to train without interruptions. And that is why he had left Naruto in the village. So he had not mentioned to them that they used Naruto as a scapegoat and turned him into the escape valve of the anger and hatred of the village. She had also not told Tsunade because she would have forced them to return to the village for her son, or she would have taken him away herself, and he needed to have ties to the village. Which joke, his son had no ties to the village and the few he did have were one-sided because according to Niji Hyuga, Naruto was aloof from the day of the Uchiha massacre, showing no one what he felt. Needless to say, after that explanation Tsunade almost beat him to death. In fact it took the intervention of Minato, Kushina, and the entirety of Jounin and Anbu of Konoha to prevent her from killing him, and they almost did not succeed. Shortly after that he was forced to take up the position of Hokage again after the resignation of his successor, who left the village with Shizune to live in the country of Spring, where her daimyo had gladly received them and made her the head of the country's medical industry. Minato began to investigate what happened during his absence and was horrified by each new thing he discovered. While Naruto was described as the strongest in physical terms in his academy records, and he was sure that was solely because he couldn't falsify that report because literally the parents of his classmates had heard it from their children, the rest of his catalog was complete garbage. The teachers taught him absolutely nothing, just like his own sensei, or even worse his student, that only left him with one question. How the hell did he do all the feats if he only had his body? Powerful it is true, but he only had that on his side, along with a horrible fighting style, and shortly after a version of the Rasengan with his strange chakra. Worst of all, what they had heard from Kakashi was that Naruto was legally blind due to covering his eyes with his Hitate. That meant that he had somehow pushed his reflexes to limits never seen before in order to fight in that state. Demons. His two brothers Menma and Shio could not have achieved a single one of those feats even with their entire arsenal, much less with the limited arsenal that his brother had, and especially with the limitation of not being able to see his opponent, relying only on his other senses. That only meant that his missing son was, in every possible sense of the word, a prodigy beyond what no one ever wanted to see. Of course, people hearing about the truth is that they were sorry for everything they had done to him, although not as much as they should have done. In fact, as Tsum had told her former friend, why should she feel bad about hunting him at the Fox Festival, if they themselves had abandoned him worse than a stray dog? Sadly, the woman was right, and because of that now those she once called friends hated him, and passionately. The formerly kind Ichiraku had pushed them out of their place in a horrible way, and those who supported Naruto barely treated them as much as necessary, and that because they had no other choice. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came when other places learned of Naruto's banishment. Something Kakashi refused to say at the time was that many of the most important alliances in the country and the village by association, if not virtually every one of them, they had recently been won, and not because of the more renowned shinobi or the precious Uchiha who had to reluctantly admit that he was Sasuke without a name and that the true heir Uchiha was his banished half-brother, but returning to the subject upon learning of the banishment and that the parents of their beloved hero had abandoned him worse than a stray dog and leper, they simply withdrew their alliance. The Waves and the others immediately withdrew their commercial support and preferred the village where Naruto's only apparent true friend resided, this being the village of Suna, who by the way also cancelled his alliance, claiming who wanted nothing to do with the village that praised the one brought as a hero and expelled the true hero, leaving things in a simple non-aggression pact. And that, in the best of cases, most of them were not even allowed that honor. Shortly after this, Oze, the new feudal who, although he was more militaristic than his older brother who died without leaving a descendant, had withdrawn support almost entirely in retaliation for having lost their alliances. To tell the truth, even if he was his children, the truth is that he would never have been so curious with them. That is why he disapproved of Minato's actions and had in fact overturned the decision and forced them to remove the boy from the bingo book. While that was happening, many teams tried to locate the boy in question without much effort. It seemed that the earth had devoured him. In fact, the only information they got from him was how the last time he and his older half-brother Itachi Uchiha were seen, they had a brother-to-brother conversation before the younger of the two retreated on his way to the world beyond the Great Wall that had kept the hidden lands away from the wild outdoors of the world. Such a wall existed since the time of the first Dragon King, a close friend of the Rakudo Sennin, who divided the world, or rather enclosed his continent from the savage outside world. A world that was said to be so immense that the hidden lands did not cover even a tenth of the world, with nations inhabited by unnatural creatures and demons beyond the shinobi's comprehension, lands filled with eternal conflict and war. In fact, the hidden nation home of the shinobi was actually considered a peaceful land by comparison. If Iz did somehow manage to break through the Great Wall, in the Sannin's opinion, he must simply be dead, at best, and worse, well, let's say that he learned not to talk about that subject again in front of Kushina. Since it was that he crossed the wall, the truth is that this was completely irrelevant. The relevant thing was that unless you were an inhabitant of the outside world, you would simply die in a few days at the hands of any of the beings that inhabited that wild and untamed world. Although his son did not do that, at least according to Sasuke, who had reluctantly told them about the Uchiha tapestry where every Uchiha living and dead since the founding of the clan was recorded. And although Naruto had been adopted, he was still part of the tapestry with his colorful name and image, which only happened if the Uchiha in question was still alive. And since until now their son's name was still on the tapestry, then they still had a small chance. But he had to put those thoughts aside for the time being. He still had many other things to think about, more specifically in the suggestion of his sensei, to overcome his precarious economic situation. Currently the only thing that continued to remain in Konoha as one of the great shinobi powers was its prestige of the past, and that it had 3 S-rank shinobi. Today many, knowing that they had banished a man who had brought back his traitorous brother alive and barely abused, they just didn't want to know anything more about them. Minato had used his fortune and that of the Uzumaki clan to keep the situation more or less stable, along with that of the Sannin, who used the royalties from his books. In fact, even several clans had to do so, with the exception of the Uchiha clan, since Sasuke did not have access to it and they doubted very much that Itachi was willing to help them. Call him crazy, but the guy who killed his own clan and who seemed to have a good relationship with his banished son should not have much desire to help them. And without the Uchiha fortune the village would not last long. In fact, the village's best chance to get ahead was to win the tournament that would be held in the Land of Spring. I wasn't entirely sure how under the yoke of the tyrant of Doto the tradition of holding a Taijutsu tournament open to any participant remained, although the addition of the possibility of allowing renegades into the tournament might have been one of the main reasons why it remained a good source of tourism. Whether it was a village with no recognition or not, and even if it was a wandering fighter, they were typically allowed the chance to fight. Normally the prize would not be that flashy, but this year it was a very tempting one, no less than 1 billion rupees to the winner. He wasn't sure where they had gotten that amount, but frankly he didn't care. Although the rumors that the actress and daimyo had heard this time had gotten a great sponsor, being none other than the White Lotus Trading House. Thinking about them actually made him shudder quite a bit. They were a house of merchants who had come from abroad 3 years ago, quickly gaining fame for their exotic products of great quality and for being the first trade mission of the new government of the outside world. Yes, new government of the world, because the government house had come with shocking news. The king of one of the most powerful countries, a certain China, had somehow managed to unify the entire damn outside world, thus creating the Empire of the Rising Sun. Without support and with only the strength of his arms and his apparent special eyes, this king managed to pacify the outer lands, and thanks to this, it was thanks to this that the White Lotus Merchants Guild were finally able to fulfill the dream of trading all over the world. He wasn't sure how they allowed the outside to enter inside the wall, but from what he had heard in rumors, actually the empire had even before the empire was able to destroy the wall. Just no one ever gave a fuck about conquering a land that they considered weak. It had hurt the pride of many, but sadly they were right. Leaving that aside, that they sponsored the tournament and could afford such a reward was a pure display of opulence, or perhaps it was the work of the emperor himself who was financing said tournament. In any case, they certainly needed that money urgently, so he would send the best that Konoha had to offer to take the prize money at all costs. He only hoped that the emperor would not participate. After all, the idea of facing a man who unified such a world was terrifying. XXXXX Empire of the Rising Sun, capital city of Kin. Unlike Minato, who was quite nervous, the emperor was actually quite calm sitting on his throne. 3 years ago the government had finally stabilized. This was the 3rd anniversary of his victory over the hostile world he encountered when he came to these lands for the first time, and no less than that today was his 25th birthday. If he was exiled at 15 and 10 years have passed, he is 25. If it was mentioned that he was 21 in the clarifications, it was because he found out about Mordred at 21, and even if he hated his birthday, his people had chosen to celebrate it with the biggest party that had already been going on for a week, no less. In reality, the celebration in question was only surpassed by the day of unification, which was the day on which the last of the nations finally signed their annexation to the empire. Even if Elfrieden and that principality of name that he was not yet able to pronounce well did not unite in a way unconventional, but with those last 2 nations the end of the War of Unification was finally proclaimed. It had taken the young man, who is now 25 years old, about 5 years, 6 if you count Elfrieden's strange circumstances, to accomplish such a feat in which he gained much, but in which he lost even more. His first true friend no less. Mommy, are you okay? He had to let out a small smile the moment he heard that voice. Your favorite princess no less. Although Tomoe had a good competition, but Mordred would always be special. Even with her tendency to call him mommy instead of daddy, but considering the more than curious circumstances of his birth she was certainly more than fine with it. Mordred was just like his father, who by the way was his first wife and the first woman he loved with all his heart. A beautiful girl with golden hair and green eyes with beautiful and perfect skin, even if her hair was a mess of messy ends when she was not forced to comb it in a high bun, which was still a disheveled mess, only less than when he was loose. He didn't say anything, he just allowed the girl to jump into his lap and sit on the throne that, whom Archeria was deceiving, had made it clear that Mordred would inherit Camelot. They would say what they wanted about his initial reaction to learning that he was a father, but he was a great father. As crazy and uncomfortable as that sounded. Happy birthday, Mom. The girl said as she wrapped her arms around the man. I don't even know if I should keep trying. The black-haired man said as he stroked his beloved princess's hair. The part about them celebrating your birthday even if you hate it? Or the part where I call you mommy even though you have that in your pants that doesn't have a father? The girl asked with that childlike naivety that only a girl of that age was. Oh, true, 9 years old could be. And I'm definitely beating Yujiro up for corrupting your mind. It wasn't a joke. He was definitely blowing the man's head off for talking about those issues with his daughter. Mordred was tomboy enough without your help, thank you very much. In the end he just let out a sigh of defeat. He would do it later. For the moment he would have to make sure that Mordred did not speak that way in front of his father. He didn't like having to explain that he hadn't been the one to say those things to her. And he mostly didn't like to explain that he was irresponsible enough to allow his friends to do it, if it was simply not made for this job. Anyway, come love, let's go horseback riding. And with that said he just took his adored daughter in his arms and started walking towards the stables. Maybe he would pick up Tomoe on the way, and with some luck he would spend the day with his two favorite people in the world away from the party of the day he hated the most in the world. XXXXX the next day. And without much luck to have avoided the damn party that was held in every corner of the damn world, the emperor arrived at his office where his right hand was already waiting for him with the documents he would have to review. Said right hand man was none other than a young man in his 20s. Well, he was neither young nor 20 years old. In fact he was about 400 or something like that. The truth is that according to him he had no idea how old he was because total immortality had completely fucked up his perception of time. Going back to the subject, he was black-haired. He had equally black eyes and was considerably thin, although he was still one of the most powerful men in the empire. Good evening, my emperor. I greet him with a slight touch of sarcasm. It's a miracle that you honor us with your presence. You know I hate my birthday, Zeref. The emperor said to his best friend. In this world, Emperor's right-hand man Zeref Dragneel, the strongest dark wizard in history, king of wizards. Emperor's right-hand man Zeref Dragneel, the strongest dark wizard in history, king of wizards. If Zeref is a king of magicians, and for those who are in fanfiction or web novel, then come to Wattpad to see the image. The man in question simply gave him a small smile of understanding. He knew it very well. He himself hated several days of his life because of his past, but even so his emperor disappeared for a whole day with two of his daughters, was something quite bad. Yet he simply chose to put it aside and focus on the important issue. I understand you, brother, better than you think, but you must understand that people, although they know your past, want you to learn to enjoy this day. The not so young man said as he sat in the chair in front of his best friend's desk. Now here's the list you asked me for as a priority. Naruto hadn't actually asked for it. He had only suggested it since he didn't want to take care of the matter in question himself. As for what the list was, this was the list of the 25 participants who could or could not enter the martial arts tournament that was going to take place in the Hidden Continent, or Australia as it was popularly known outside the Great Wall. I wasn't sure some of them wanted to, but some hadn't confirmed it yet. They probably had no interest in crushing what Yujiro called them wimpy ninjas. Something wrong? Zeref asked. At the same moment he noticed his best friend's expression was a grimace that he only made when he wanted to beat someone up. Usually Yujiro. Nothing. Only Yujiro is corrupting Mordred again. And of course Zeref wasn't surprised when he heard that. In fact he even expected it. Apparently he had a personal goal in life to turn the girl into the biggest tomboy in the empire. He wasn't sure why he didn't care to know, but he hoped she would stop. His brother adored that girl, and hit hard. Maybe that's why I was doing it now that I thought about it. Be that as it may, brother, I've already been in charge of recruiting the best warriors. The black-haired man told him, choosing to get the subjects back on track. Later he would go to inform the 10th King of Heaven that his brother wanted to kill him. Again, transport is ready. The black-haired man asked, for a week now. Some of them are actually drooling at the idea of ripping off Rock Lee's leg. Although considering what Pickle is like, said the black-haired man before shaking his head. To tell the truth he wasn't sure why out of all the possible warriors of the underground village that Yujiro could have chosen, he chose the damn cannibal caveman. I don't like that smile, Naruto. Oh, you can't blame me, Zef. After all, the idea of Pickle eating Lee's leg is hilarious. After all, the idea of Pickle eating Lee's leg is